All right, everybody, we have Matt Dixon, founding partner at DCM Insights. You're probably more familiar with Challenger Sales. He's the father of Challenger Sales, and he and Ted McKenna have an awesome book, not quite really new anymore, called the Jolt Effect: How High Performers Overcome Customer Indecision. And that is our title topic also for today. We're sponsored by Sandler, who's a sales training sponsor of Sales Community. So thank you, Sandler. And for those that are members of Sales Community, thanks. For those that are not, Tucker will put up a free link. You can join salescommunity.com/winter free while we're still in the winter. So Matt lives in the DC area. His interests besides work and family are running, biking, golfing, and he was just on a ski trip out to Utah, which I'm very jealous about. Tucker, it looks like you're on free. The E may be off to the side, but I'll let you figure that out. And Matt and I first met back at a Gong event. I think I've been around Dreamforce and San Fran. But definitely, obviously, lots of great knowledge and wisdom, and certainly great guy, great person, and Jolt Effect. I think lots of just really cool ideas there. So basically, I was pretty impressed and said, "Hey, we got to get you on Tech Sales Insights." So a couple of other intro comments. So from Amit Bendoff, who's the CEO of Gong, Matt Dixon set the standard with his Challenger Sales work, and now has taken the bar even higher with Jolt Effect. We frequently use him for events and is always graded as one of our best speakers. From Michael Norton and David Mattson at Sandler. Matt has always been a guy who understands sales and salespeople. Seems like he is always a step ahead as we all think about the future of sales and selling. So interesting perspective there, something that you might think is kind of just traditional, but thinking about what is that new edge stuff, and you're always on the leading edge of that. So congratulations for that.
That's very kind of them to say.
Awesome. All right, so let's jump into the questions here. And for those watching along or listening, you can see us or hear us. We can't see you, but if you want to post any comments or post any questions, please do. And as always, we have Tucker behind the scenes. We'll pull those for us. So Tucker, thanks for your help. So you went to Mount St. Mary's University, summa cum laude, 1994. What was your first job?
I feel old.
Not as old as me. I got 9 years. Yeah, you still got some hair. What was your first job out of college?
Not for long, Randy. So first, my first job out of college is I went to grad school because I didn't want to get a job. So it's interesting because at the time, 94, I worked on a senior thesis. I was really into, the topic. It was political economy. I was writing about emerging markets in Latin America and Southeast Asia, and got really interested in that topic. And then started exploring graduate programs. And I had no idea that if you get accepted into a doctoral program, they usually pay your tuition and then they give you a stipend to go to school effectively. So I was like, this is great. So I did have a job. I was working for a professor as a research assistant for a number of years. And that was great. I mean, I had a great time. I was early in life, wasn't married, didn't have kids yet. Put off my engagement a number of years, much to my wife's chagrin. But we made it through. And then after 9 years in academia, from college through to grad school, I decided to go into the private sector. But yeah, it was a fun experience.
Oh, awesome! And then maybe go through your career from there.
Yeah, so I was I got a PhD in political economy. I went to University of Pittsburgh. I was in the School of Public and International Affairs there. So that was like a 5-year thing, start to finish. And coming out, I think when I was like 51% of the way done getting my PhD, I realized that I wasn't super interested in policy. I was more interested in companies and in the private sector, strategy, et cetera. And so my interest really kind of started to shift as I got through with my degree, but I stuck it out because I figured, hey, you never know, I might want to go back and be a college professor someday, and this could come in handy. So, and like I said, I didn't have any kids at the time, so I stuck it out, finished up. But then I was immediately looking for companies out there that would value, a guy like me that has a lot of in-depth research experience, writing experience, but was more focused on strategy and what companies are doing. And so I found this company called Corporate Executive Board in the DC, based in the DC area. It was a company just gone public, actually. It eventually was renamed as CEB. And then in 2017, CEB was acquired by Gardner Group for about $3 billion. And I spent almost 20 years there. I was as a researcher. I spent about 4 or 5 years in new product development and corporate strategy. And then I spent the duration of my time running the sales and customer experience practice areas. So we sold subscription research to functional leaders. So in this case, we were selling our research to CSOs and CROs or VPs of customer experience, chief customer officer types of folks in big companies around the world. And that's where we did the research around the challenger sale, the follow-up to the challenger sale, the challenger customer. And we also wrote a book in the customer experience space called The Effortless Experience. So that was a fantastic run. I left around 2017, spent a year at Korn Ferry doing management consulting, then got recruited away to run research and product at an AI company before AI became really cool, out of Austin, Texas. And then in 2021, late 2021, early 2022, went into business with my co-founders, two former CEB guys, Rory Channer and Ted McKenna, to form DCM Insights, and we've been doing it ever since. And it's been an absolute blast. So late to the entrepreneurial thing, but I did read somewhere that folks in their 50s make great entrepreneurs because they've learned all the mistakes not to make early in their career. So I'm I'm hoping that's true.
Perfect. All right. Well, I assume DCM is the initials.
That's right. Dixon, Channer, McKenna. Yep.
Perfect. So maybe tell us more about DCM Insights.
Yeah, so we do, our company really is focused on research-based consulting, advisory, training for commercial organizations. And we split our time, or I should say our company is really split. On the one hand, we focus on B2B sales organizations. So we do a lot of speaking and consulting and training around the Jolt Effect, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a few minutes. And then we've got another side of our business, which focuses more on doer sellers. So what I mean by that is partners in professional services firms. So that could be lawyers in law firms, accountants, investment bankers, consultants, executive search or executive recruiters, even partners or folks running tech professional services sales within a tech organization. So people are really selling advice more than they're selling a product, where, if you will, they are the product. And it's a very different go-to-market motion. So we've got a business we call the Activator Development System, based on some new research we've done, where we sell it into the professional services space.
Wow, very, very cool. And you're in the selling space for a long time, most of your career. Yeah. So what's your go-to-market approach with DCM Insights?
Yeah, it's funny. One of the things, and folks who are familiar with Challenger will know that the premise or the core of the Challenger approach is, how do we put kind of provocative, engaging content out there in the market that leads to us as a supplier, right? How do we change the way the market thinks and their clients think in a way that they have to come to us? As somebody said to me not too long ago, what you're really trying to do when you're a challenger seller is you're trying to start a fire and then be the only person who sells the fire extinguisher that can put that fire out. That's really what we do. So if I think about our go-to-market approach, we don't do, I would dare say, any outbound sales actually as an organization. All of our sales efforts are off of inbound leads, which we generate by putting out research like the Jolt Effect or our research around activators. We have a new book coming out next year that's really focused on that professional services sale, that doer seller model. And so our stock and trade is going out there and doing disruptive, we think, cutting edge research, database content, and putting it out there in like HBR and books, on podcasts like this one. And people hear it, they read it, and they say, hey, we've got this problem. I need to talk to these guys. And so again, if I look at our pipeline, it's I'd say like 99% inbound. And so when we get somebody who reaches out to us, they're already thinking in the idea, the problem's already catch their attention. The solution we're talking about has already resonated with them. So they show up, at our doorstep, ready to engage in a commercial conversation, which we find really accelerates things and creates a different go-to-market motion.
Oh, great. So before I get into Jolt Effect, maybe back on Challenger sales. Sorry.
Yeah.
So with Challenger, there's always the good story, kind of behind the story. We had John McMahon from Medic, and great to know the PTC and kind of how all that came about. Kind of what's the story behind the story with Challenger?
So, I have Challenger, the research started in late '08, kind of early '09. And so anybody who's been around for a while remembers that time in the sales. It was a terrible time. I think
Yeah.
probably second only the pandemic in
Yeah.
terms of like,
Financial crisis.
oh yeah, like the bottom just came out of the market. It's a bloodbath out there, right? Everyone's missing their number by miles. And we were about to write a study on a totally different topic. I don't even remember what it was. It was or an org structure study or something like that. We get into the fall of 2008 when like Lehman Brothers collapses and the whole global financial crisis sort of kicks up. Yeah, and it was just an absolute mess out there. We went back to our clients because we built our topical agenda off of what our clients were looking for. So we had 500-600 heads of sales we worked with around the world. And when the world started to fall apart, we went back to them and said, "Hey, we were going to study this. This is what you told us 6 months ago. We're now kind of feeling like that is not as relevant, or nobody needs an org structure study right now." And the question our clients came back to us with was an interesting one. It wasn't help us sell more effectively in this downturn, but it was help us resolve the answer to kind of a mysterious question we've got. All these heads of sales said, "Look, we are getting killed out there right now." But what's really interesting is on my team, there are a couple of sellers, maybe a small handful, who are continuing to not just hit their number, but exceed their number. These folks are bringing in deals we would be thrilled to get in the best of times, but they're doing it right in the teeth of this really awful sales environment. What are these folks doing differently? And so it was kind of this research study really built off of like, what are these lead steers, these high performers doing to sell effectively in a downturn? That's what gave birth to the 5 profiles, the Challenger sale. I think when we sit back and we think about that research, though, it actually really wasn't a story about selling effectively in a downturn. I think what those great salespeople, those challengers, had figured out is how do I sell to customers who are out there learning on their own, who want to box you out, who want to put you in an RFP process, who want to force you to compete on price, who made up their mind about who you are and what you can do for them. And it just really does, it forces you into this price driven sale that salespeople don't want to be in. And these salespeople seem to be avoiding that. So what were they doing differently? So it was kind of a story about selling to the modern buyer. The buyers out there doing all their research on their own and engaging you very, very late in the buying process.
Wow, fantastic! And Challenger still lives on to this day. And you've I guess kind of move on, or going skating to where the puck is going. So Jolt Effect. So I guess maybe a similar story or similar question there. Kind of what's the story behind the story for how you thought of doing that with
that's
Ted?
that one's got I think even a more interesting story. So all these things start in like the worst environment. So if global financial crisis. So remember March 2020, like how could we forget? That was we're all watching Tiger King and baking sourdough bread and like going to work in our pajamas and things like that. So this is right in the spring of 2020 when the pandemic hit and the world went into shutdown. And it was in that environment so I was working with my co-author, Ted McKenna, at a company, this AI company I mentioned earlier, is a company called Tether. They're in the conversation intelligence business. So they like Gong, they take unstructured data, call recordings, email exchanges, chat interactions, and use AI and machine learning to bring structure and meaning to that data set so that companies and salespeople can learn how to improve. And so we had this really powerful technology, and Ted and I looked at each other on Zoom, of course, in March of 2020. It said, what would be kind of interesting? What if, because we just entered a moment where sales went 100% virtual overnight. Like Randy, you and I remember, but leading into the pandemic, there were more and more portions or moments in the sales process were happening virtually, right? On Zoom, on Teams, on other platforms like that. But in March of 2020, it was 100% virtual, right? No more visits in the client's office. We didn't know how long that was going to last. But what we did know was this may be the only time in history where you can capture all that data, start to end, in a sales process from the first meeting to the closing meeting. You can capture all those interactions and then use this technology that we had access to study them at scale. Now, when we got into the data, we found some pretty interesting things. The big eye opener was that we found, and this is where we opened the Jolt Effect, we found that anywhere between 40 and 60% of a salesperson's qualified opportunities will ultimately be lost to no decision. So these are just these are the bane of the salesperson's existence, right? You think about the time and the energy that you spend pursuing deals that just kind of go out into the ether. They just evaporate on you. You get ghosted. The customer goes radio silent on you. You don't know why. Eventually, your manager says, enough. Like, Randy, we got to mark that one as closed loss. Just mark it as no decision because we don't really know what happened, right? We never really understood that kind of loss. There's a lot of conventional wisdom out there, and there's a lot of, tribal wisdom, I would say, in sales, but nobody ever really studied that problem. What was really interesting is we found that high performers, no surprise, they converted dramatically higher levels than average performers. But the surprise was this: the biggest difference, the biggest explanatory variable we found. We looked at 8,300 variables in this data set. We collected 2.5 million sales calls from dozens of companies. And the biggest swing factor, the most important thing that explained why high performers did so much better than average performers is how those high performers dealt with what I'd call the cold feet moment in the sale. Like the moment that happens after the customer says they want to do business with you, but before they actually sign the agreement, where they start, hemming and hawing, and they're dredging up objections that you thought you'd addressed long ago, and they start straddling the fence. And I don't really know. I mean, we need to do another demo, maybe another reference call, maybe I don't know if the time is right. And then eventually the thing slips through the salesperson's fingers. And again, they never really understand what happened to make the customer go dark on them. So that was the genesis of that research, but it was really born out of the pandemic. I mean, just this unique moment in time that we had access to.
Wow. So it sounds like you're focusing on the moment from when somebody says, yes, we're interested, and then gets cold feet, as opposed to kind of how do you get them interested? Because most salespeople or poor performers can't even get it to the point where they do want to do it. So you're making a distinction there.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well said. So one of the things because a lot of people ask me, how does this fit in with Challenger? And I think you just nailed it, which is sales is really a 2-act play. The first one is exactly what you said, Randy, is you got to get the customer interested. This is the why change question for the customer. How do I show the customer that their status quo is not acceptable anymore? It's not good enough, that there's a cost to their inaction. All these things we talk about. Create that burning platform, get them to say, yeah, okay, let's move forward. But what we found in this study was that there's a whole second act to the sales play, if you will. Even after you answer the why change question, you get the customer interested, you still have a huge percentage of those deals will end up not converting not because you failed to overcome the customer's indifference, but because you failed to overcome their indecision. They start to get cold feet for reasons that salespeople really don't understand particularly well, but high performers do, and they figure out a playbook to get that customer over the line. It's a difference between, again, creating that burning platform, the cost of inaction, all the stuff that salespeople have been taught to do, stuff that we talk about in the Challenger sale extensively. That's what Challenger is about. It's about overcoming customer indifference. But once you do that, what we realize is the best salespeople, they're very, very good at putting their arm around the customer's shoulders, figuratively, of course, and saying, you know what? You're making a great decision. You're in trusted hands here. Nothing's going to go wrong. You're going to look like a hero, not like a fool. It's going to be okay. Let's move forward, right? And so they developed an entire playbook for getting that customer who, left to their own devices, will go dark, will go radio silent, instilling that confidence and getting that customer to feel good about the decision that they're about to make.
Gotcha. And would you say that indecision is kind of, if you take whatever population of sales overall, is that kind of weakness, or I guess, dealing with indecision, is that better or worse now than what it was during COVID or before COVID?
Yeah, I think it's worse, just tactically. So I remember, Randy, when we were out at Dreamforce and we met each other, I think it was back in 2022, because the book had just come out, right? And I remember being at Dreamforce and talking to heads of sales and people who knew Challenger really well. Oh, tell me about the new book, and I give them a little elevator pitch on it. And a lot of people were saying at the time, like, we don't really have that problem. We don't lose any deals to no decision. Some of those same exact people I talked to 6 months later who were like, can you tell me more about this research? Because this problem snuck up on us, and we got into the data and we realized, like, we're not losing 40 to 60% of our deals in a decision. It's more like 70, 80, 90% of our deals. And I think that's just gotten worse in this really tough sales environment that we've been, muddling through for the past, year and a half now. There are things going on when we look at what causes customers to be indecisive, there's lots of things that give customers cold feet, but there are 3 biggies. The first one is that customers get overwhelmed by too many options. So they look at all these integrations. They look at all these different ways to configure the solution, different contract lengths, different, do I go use case specific? Do I go enterprise wide? Like
You're talking once I've decided I'm going to
yeah,
go with whatever company. So once I decide I'm going with the company, company kind of overcomplicates it.
exactly. And salespeople are usually guilty of this, right? Like here's more and more and
Because you're
more.
taught, hey, do have different options. So
Oh yeah.
it's not a
Yeah.
yes or no on this thing. It's, hey, which one of these things do you want?
That's right. So I know I want to work with your company. I just don't know how to work with your company. And by the way, when you show me a gazillion options and they all look awesome, you know what the safest course of action is? Don't choose any of them, right? Because you don't want to be on the hook for choosing
Yeah.
the wrong contract length, the wrong configuration, the wrong use case to go after, the wrong deployment of the solution. So that's the first thing. The second thing is too much information. So it's not choice overload, information overload. So if you think about any of the companies listening to the show right now, anybody out there, think about how much has been written about your company, the technology that you sell, and all of your competitors. You know, you're thinking like you could fill like a football stadium.
Customer could know more than the sales rep knows.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and this, and by the way, right when the customer feels like they've learned enough, then something new comes. I'll give you a quick example. So I was talking to head of sales, big tech company just last week, and he told me that they closed. They were chasing a deal for it was like almost a year, huge deal for them, game changing for them, biggest deal they've ever sold. Finally, get the customer over the line. They were up against the biggest players in their market. They were the underdog. They end up winning the deal. It was like tens of millions of dollars. Um, a couple weeks after the deal was inked, the new Gartner Magic Quadrant, they did a refresh of the Magic Quadrant, which actually showed this company as kind of middle of the pack. As soon as that happened, that came out, the buyer, the person who signed off on this on the customer side, started getting bombarded by everyone else in the organization. It's like, hey, did you see that the guys we just wrote a big check for and we signed this big multi-year contract with, they're kind of Gartner thinks they're kind of Like, do we look at these guys? Well, how about those guys? Why didn't we go with the leader? And this guy was like, everybody had an opinion. Everyone's coming out of the woodwork questioning his decision and what the buying committee had decided on. And they ended up restarting even though they'd signed with this company, they restarted the evaluation. Now we got it because everyone is looking at us. We got to go talk to everyone else. And they're looking for ways out of the contract now, right? But this is this feeling the customer has that I might do all this research, but I cannot afford for some new piece of information to come to light after I make the decision. Maybe that information makes that decision look like not such a great one after all. So that's information overload. And then the third source of indecision we identified in the research is expectations overload. So this is where what's really interesting about this one, it's what it comes down to is the customer they don't have confidence that they're going to see the ROI you're promising or the benefits you're promising. Now, what's so interesting about this one, Randy, is that 2.5 million sales calls. When this one came up, 99% of the time, it was not that the customer didn't believe the vendor's claims. Instead, it was, hey, Randy, I, be- I believe what you're saying. I believe that you guys can deliver these benefits and help me with this ROI. But Randy, you don't understand how screwed up we are, how dysfunctional our company is. Like, there's no way we could ever accomplish that. We will mess this stuff up every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So they blame themselves. But really, what this comes down to is the customer, like they need an insurance policy, they need a safety net, they need that vendor to put their arm around the shoulder and say, "We got your back. We've done this before. You're going to look like a hero, not like a fool." And you think about those big decisions, like in today's environment, those are like career-ending decisions. These are things that people are just looking to let people go who make bad decisions and don't make good use of the company's money. Putting your name on a contract and signing up for a big technology expenditure that doesn't actually pay off, that's a bad look right now. So those are the things that generally drive indecision. Now, if you think about those things for a moment, back to your question, is it getting worse or better? Well, I think for most technology companies, we're offering more and more options, partner integrations, partner ecosystems, new products coming off the roadmap, new bells, whistles, and features, right? Think about information. The amount of information available to your customers today is way more than it was yesterday, and it's going to be way more than it is to tomorrow than it is today. In expectations overload, every tech company out there is promising, transformation, and that sounds awesome, but it's a double-edged sword because it's really hard to accomplish, and it increases the believability gap for your customer. So in some ways, we're kind of doing this to ourselves, but we are amplifying the customer's indecision. Then when you put on top of it stuff like the downturn. I don't even know if we're in a downturn, but if we are, in some segments we certainly are. But you put on top of it the fact that we've gone through this SaaS reckoning over the past few years, and there are a lot of people who, wasn't a good look when the CFO got in, found out that only 5% or 10% of the seat licenses are actually being used. And they've had to renegotiate all these contracts. Like nobody wants to sign up for shelfware again. And so you've got this kind of overhang that's making even normally decisive people behave very indecisively right now.
And then with this whole kind of indecision or talking about these different overloads, does that mean that if there's a time back 20, 30 years ago, the whole thing was, hey, you don't get fired for buying from IBM, right? So you had big companies were safer choice. In the last kind of 15, 20 years, you had kind of smaller companies kind of became totally fine to go buy from. But then now in this day and age, is it, based on what you just said, does that make it harder for an earlier stage company to break in and easier for a larger company to be that safer choice?
Greg, it's a great question. So on the one hand, yes, I think that for that smaller company, that startup or scale up, it's harder, right? Because you don't have the track record, you don't have the customer references, you don't have the airtight ROI where you can virtually guarantee the customer that they're going to get X when they buy the solution. So that makes it really tough, especially right now where budgets are tight. There's a lot of scrutiny even on small purchases in the current buying environment. But the flip side is not necessarily true that today, you'd much rather be the big players, the heavyweights in the space, because, and this happened to me actually last year. I was at a meeting with a tech sales team for one of the big cloud players out there, and they said, "Boy, it exactly as you said, it's really good to be us right now because this is a really tough environment for those risky startups and scale ups that don't have the track record that we do." I mean, we are a household name. Everybody knows our CEO. We put on huge conferences, et cetera. Everyone knows who we are. I said, maybe, but you guys also offer like 4,000 versions of your product. So you're actually much worse from a choice overload perspective than your competitors. Information, there's orders of magnitude more. Everybody's got an opinion about you guys, good and bad, which increases the information overload. And then you guys charge a lot more for your stuff than everyone else. These point solutions that don't charge as much, right? So you guys are putting huge price tags in front of people. That makes them pretty antsy that they might not capture the benefits when making such a huge outlay for your solution. So it doesn't necessarily follow that being the 800-pound gorilla is a better place to be because, again, the 800-pound gorillas make a lot of those overload problems worse for the customer.
Gotcha. So you said before talking about, I call it kind of closed loss, but, back, I'll say, 20, 30 years ago, companies were maniacal around, okay, if a deal doesn't happen, if it was one loss or deferred, why was it won? Why was it lost? Why was it deferred? Especially in the loss side. But how many times these days to companies, it's almost like companies don't care. Reps can just put, okay, close lost, okay, and nobody ever circles back. And there'll be companies I'm working with where I'll say, there's not just, I would call it sloppy sales is really why it got lost. But nobody really seems to have that desire to really dig into it like used to be.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And, I think because of that, what's happened is that because nature abhors a vacuum. So what happens is that the conventional wisdom takes over as we start making assumptions as to why that we don't know for sure why the deal was lost, but we kind of go back to the conventional wisdom. And the conventional wisdom in sales is that if a customer doesn't make a decision, if they ghost you, they go radio silent, then you didn't overcome their indifference. They are still stuck in their status quo mindset, right? You haven't proven them what they're doing today is not good enough. You haven't shown them that your solution is a compelling enough reason to change. Or perhaps you haven't shown them that this is a huge priority. You haven't created that burning platform. And so what salespeople tend to do when the customer starts to hesitate is they make the assumption it's because the customer still prefers their status quo. So they break out their hammer and they go to town. For them, every hesitant customer is a nail and they got one hammer and they just beat all day long on it. So they go back to the customer, and usually salespeople do this in one of three ways. The first thing is they go back to the customer and try to reconvince them of the benefits. Like, Randy, you must have blinked or something. We're in the demo, or did you see how many zeros in that ROI calculation? Man, how could you say no to this? Like, you're going to pass up on this goodness. If that doesn't work, usually salespeople, step number 2 is to dial up the FUD, right? I'm just trying to make you squirm a little bit, dial up that cost of inaction, make you feel the pain of doing nothing or think about the pain of doing nothing. And then step number 3, if those two things don't work, is almost always an urgency driver, like a 10% discount that's only good this quarter, right? So we're like, hey, we just know people don't want to spend more later. So if you're on the fence, you might as well save a little bit of money by saying yes now. And what we found is when salespeople do that stuff, especially if we're talking about a customer who said, yeah, I'm convinced I want to move forward, but then they start to become hesitant and indecisive, doing those things actually makes things worse, not better. You increase the odds the deal will be lost to no decision. And the reason is that it turns out it's not because the customer is wedded to their status quo. It's because they're suffering from indecision. In other words, they want to buy from you, but they can't. They got in their own head about what could go wrong. They know your solution is compelling. They know they got to change. They know there's a burning platform. They know they want to save the 10% by buying this quarter instead of next quarter, but they're worried. Have I made the right configuration decisions? Have I done enough research, or am I going to get surprised later? And do these guys have our backs? Or am I going to look like a fool when we don't capture the ROI that is on the business case, that my name is on, that the CFO is going to approve, and then everyone's looking at me saying, you screwed up. And so what the shorthand for salespeople is, look, these FOMO tactics we tend to use, there's a time and a place to use those things. We talk a lot in the Challenger sale about overcoming the customer status quo. There's a time and a place to dial up the FOMO, right? The fear of missing out. But this Jolt effect is more about dialing down the FOMO. The FOMO is the fear of messing up. And that's what Jolt sellers do really, really well, is instill that confidence with the customer, not trying to scare them into action, but instilling confidence so they feel good about the decision and we get them to move forward.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard recently, a closed loss. It's always the customer's fault. It's never,
Oh, yeah.
hey, I could have done this better. I screwed up, or could have done this or that better. So, Just gave me a great idea. I do a weekly post, which is I might be old school, but so this will be one we'll do going forward. So, so around this kind of indecision problem or opportunity, you could spin it the other way, say it's opportunity. Any other suggestions for sales teams?
Yeah, so the Jolt is actually, for those folks who've read the book, is actually an acronym. So it stands for the 4 behaviors that we identified that high performers use to get customers to overcome their indecision, get them, out of that cold feet moment, straddling the fence, not move forward, and instill that confidence. So the 4 behaviors really quickly are, J is judging the level of indecision. You got to know what you're dealing with, right? You got to know, how indecisive is this person? Is there something about this decision that's amplifying their indecision? And is there other stuff going on in their company, or maybe the market they participate in or compete in, that is amplifying that indecision? So you got to be able to size it, get your arms around it, and then figure out what to go do next. Let's imagine the problem is you're putting too many choices in front of the customer. They don't really know what's nice to have, what's neat to have, and they're gonna ghost you because they don't want to make a mistake and choose the wrong thing. Well, the O in Jolt is offering a recommendation. So instead of just making it the customer's problem and saying, well, Randy, let's talk about what your needs are. Let's talk about what brought you to the trade show booth. Let me make a recommendation to you. So this is very similar to, like, Randy, remember, like, think about the last time you went to a new restaurant and you looked at all the menu options. They all look great. What would happen if you asked that wait person what they recommend and they say, I don't know, sir, what are you in the mood to eat tonight? Like, it's totally unhelpful, but it's actually what most salespeople do. They put the decision back on the customer.
Right.
What a great wait person says is, you want my honest opinion? This is my favorite dish. It's the one that all the Yelp reviews, you look up a restaurant, all mention this dish by name. It's hands down our most popular here. But here's another one. Doesn't get as many Yelp reviews. Personal favorite of mine. It's a little bit lighter if you're not, because the first one's a lot of food. But you know what? You really can't go wrong here. Everything we make is delicious. Now, when I do that as a wait person, I harness what's called the delegation effect. Because if you go with my recommendation, you don't like it, you're blaming me as well as yourself, right? It's your decision ultimately, but I'm the one who told you to do it. So great B2B salespeople also offer that recommendation. Hey, look, given where you guys are right now, here's what I would do, right? I would go in this direction because companies like yours get a ton of value out of that configuration. The other stuff, we can look at that next year or the year after when you're ready for it, but let's focus in here. The L, let's imagine it's information overload we're struggling with. We got to get the customer to stop doing their own research and start trusting us as an expert, as a guide in the journey, that they don't need to do all this research because we already have done it. They don't have to leave no stone unturned because we already turned over all the stones, and we're going to share all that information with them. L is limiting the exploration. We've got to get the customer to stop doing endless research, endless demos, endless reference calls, endless reading of Magic Quadrant and Forrester Wave reports, you name it. We just got to get them to trust us. This is a really tough one for salespeople. The best salespeople in the world in our study, the way they instill confidence with the customer and get the customer to stop trying to be an expert and start trusting the salesperson as the expert, is they actually are brutally honest with the customer very, very early on. They'll say something like, Randy, we'd love to work with you. Trust me, I would love to list you amongst our customers, but based on what you guys are looking for, I don't actually know that we're the best service provider for you. In fact, I think our competitors might be a better fit for you. Or, Randy, I know you're talking about rolling this out enterprise wide, but I think we might want to start smaller. I'd love to sell you the $1 million deal right now, but I think if we start smaller, it gives us a chance to learn how to work together, experience any failure in a small contained way, and then expand from there once we know where the landmines and pitfalls are, right? So it's that, or even telling the customer that certain features in the platform really aren't ready for prime time, and you wouldn't build a business case around that. So these moments of kind of brutal honesty early on in the sale show the customer, you as a salesperson, you're not here to oversell me. You're not here to put one over on me. You're not here to hide the dirty laundry. You're here to get me to a great decision. In fact, I don't even think you care whether I buy from you or not. You just want me to make the right decision for me, my team, my organization. That's what motivates you. And if we could show the customer that, then they will trust us as their expert because we don't really have anything to hide. We're being totally above board and transparent with them. The T is taking risk off the table. And this deals with that expectations overload. We got to manage expectations, under promise and over deliver, but we also got to create a safety net for our customer. And in tech, there's lots of different ways, shapes, and forms I could take. I mentioned one before, telling the customer to maybe start smaller than they're thinking, to kind of contain that initial experience together, learn some lessons, and then expand from there. Or think about adding professional services to an engagement. So this isn't to suggest giving it away, but what great salespeople do, even around with customers who want to DIY it and they want to roll it out themselves and implement it themselves, they'll almost always sell some professional services along with it as an insurance policy. So, hey, Randy, I know you guys have the team, you have the resources, you want to roll this out. You certainly can do that with our platform, but I think you would be well served to add a complement of hours from our professional services team just in case you guys go off track, and then we can bring the A team in, swarm the problem, get you back up and running. Don't want you to experience any downtime, any slippage in the product and hitting your objectives. So again, these are things that we can do to make our customer feel like, again, we got their back. Like the worst case scenario, they're going to hit expectations, but there's a high chance they're going to exceed those. And again, they're going to look like a hero, not like a fool. Now we like it because Jolt is it's an acronym, right? But it also speaks to what's happening. Our customers stuck. They're in their own way, but they're in their own heads, right? They're stuck in this no man's land, this indecision land, and we're trying to jolt them into action to get them to move forward.
Wow. And just trying to think around kind of with a lot of this, the notion of kind of pilots or evaluation comes into play, right? So
pilots for sure.
How many times do sales teams do an awful job of setting the criteria and expectation? If it is A, B, and C, okay, then you buy it or you recommend to buy it. And here's what that decision-making process is, above and the usual things that go with that.
Yeah.
But how many times does that just, totally get missed? They're done in the pilot. Okay, now what happens?
Yeah. Done well, it can totally work and can serve a lot of these objectives we're talking about, especially that de-risking piece, taking risk off the table. But I've heard sales teams talk about, we try to do pilots, but unfortunately, sometimes largely it's our own fault. We let it turn into a science experiment, not a pilot, right? And it's like, like you said, the metrics are ill-defined, the use case is ill-defined, the goalposts, nobody knows where they are, and you're actually in that sense, confusing the customer at a higher level than they were before the pilot, and it's not doing you any favors.
Yeah, it's amazing, amazing for sure. And then, do you think I have a theory? I'll see if I'll lead the witness and find if you disagree. But I think during COVID, a lot of sales teams actually did really well, and a lot of people thought, "Hey, I'm crushing it, blah blah blah." And I'd say the fish kind of jumped in the boat. Now all of a sudden, it's a little bit harder. You got to go fish. And they kind of give up on opportunities. So it could be indecision or it could be just kind of giving up. Yeah. And then I'll be saying with, opportunities, I'm going, no, well, why don't you go back? There's some interest. Well, they weren't interested. Well, you got to sell some. Yeah. People kind of, maybe the overarching thing maybe is kind of, got lazy thinking they were too good. And then second part of that is then also kind of lost the desire to continually improve and learn.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I can't remember if it was this famous saying, but was it Warren Buffett who said, when the tide goes out, you see who's wearing a bathing suit and who's not, right? But it's kind of that, right? And when the tide goes out, you see who actually is a really good salesperson. And selling is look, I'm not a sales guy. I write about sales and I research what great salespeople do, but I'm not a sales guy. But in an environment where people are like, fighting to get in line to buy your solution, and money is flowing freely, and interest rates are zero, and
Right.
venture money is just flowing, and it's just like a bonanza. You know, almost everyone, even guys like me, can sell. It's when things get really tough where you start to separate the great sellers from the rest. I'll give you a quick in Jolt terms. So we looked at the if you look at 2.5 million sales calls, what we found is this pretty interesting. Every customer out there is going to tell you that they're decisive, right? If you ask them, if you consider yourself a decisive leader, of
Oh,
course
yeah.
they're going to say absolutely. The data says that they're mostly lying, or at least they're suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, and they think they're more decisive than they actually are. When we look at signs of indecision in recorded sales calls, we find that 87% of the 2.5 million we studied were with customers who were at least moderately indecisive, if not highly indecisive. So if you find a decisive customer, awesome, sell them everything you make as soon as humanly possible. But that's only 13% of the market. The rest of the market is wringing their hands and straddling the fence and getting cold feet. And what we see is that high performers and or Jolt sellers and average performers, they both sell really well when you're looking at those 13%, the decisive customers. Jolt sellers convert like 70% of those. So it's like they knock the cover off the ball. Average performers convert at like 40%. So that's still a really high conversion rate. As soon as we get into the bulk of the market, the moderately and highly indecisive, things absolutely fall apart for average performers. They start converting at the moderately indecisive customer level at 26%. And at the deeply indecisive customer level, it's like 6%, right? So it's like throwing a dart blindfolded at the dartboard and hoping you hit the bullseye. For Jolt sellers, they convert at 52%. Or sorry, it's 57% with the moderately indecisive customer. So almost 60% conversion rate. And that's where the bulk of the market is that moderate level of indecision. And then with the deeply, deeply indecisive customers, they convert at 31%. So they actually convert more of those deeply indecisive customers than average performers convert with moderately indecisive customers. So it's the tide has gone out, and it's revealed that these folks are doing something fundamentally different from the average seller. Now, just like Challenger, we didn't invent this. We didn't never invented Challenger selling. We didn't invent Jolt selling. We just found that that's what high performers had figured out on their own. It's this lead steer effect, right? They see the market changing. They see that what they're being taught is not exactly equipping them for success, and they innovate their way to victory. And so we have the benefit of studying that and then giving language to it and some data behind it and making it something that everyone else can learn from.
Wow, amazing. So the you're familiar with Myers-Briggs and the
Yeah.
personality profile, right? Do they test for somebody's decisiveness? I know you have whether you're introvert or extrovert and kind of other things. Is there a way, kind of personality profile ways to see if somebody's decisive or not?
Yeah, we talk about in the book. There's kind of three is around this J, judging the level of indecision. Part of that is understanding who your buyer is as a person. So this is about personality type, and you're never going to administer a Myers-Briggs test to your customer, but there are some tells or some things you want to look for. So I'll give you one example. So one marker of a person's individual level of decisiveness is whether they are a satisficer or a maximizer. So, in sales terms, what this means is a satisficer is somebody who can look at all the features and capabilities of your solution and they can prioritize. They can say, Randy, the most important thing to us is speed and flexibility. We're okay spending. We know like price is not we're not buying on price. We're buying on this other thing. And this other thing, we don't even care about that. Maximizers want you to be the fastest and most flexible, the cheapest, and you got to be top of the charts on everything else, right? They're never happy and they're always looking for that gap, the thing that you're not as good as your competitors. And then they get kind of turned all around, right? Because they will never find the vendor who is number one in every single dimension. That is a maximizer is like death for a salesperson. If you find somebody who can't prioritize what's important, who can't take the 10 attributes and force rank them from most important to least important, and is not willing to say, all you got to be is good enough on these dimensions, and that's cool. But you got to be number one on these other things that we really care deeply about. If the customer's unable to do that, you've got a maximizer, and a maximizer is never going to be content. And so that's a personality dimension. But again, we talk about well, what about this sale? What about this decision is amping up their level of indecision? Is it we put too many options in front of them? Is that there's too much information for them to sift through to get educated? Is it that this is too risky, right? It's too big of a decision. And then you got to look at the contextual factors. Are we in a recession? Did their company just go through layoffs? Did they make a big purchase with one of our competitors in the past and it blew up in their faces? And now people have egg on their face and they're bringing that baggage to this decision. So they may be normally decisive, but because of what happened in the past, it's making them very indecisive about this particular call they have to make.
Well, fantastic. So everybody, I get kind of lost in the moment here. So good going through everything here. So if anybody's watching or following along, feel free to ask any questions that you like as well. Certainly really fascinating here. So anyway, side note, I was going to say there's a company, Humantech AI, that does, you can go to your LinkedIn and it does a pretty good job of saying kind of what is your personality profile. It'd be interesting to see around this whole notion of decisiveness. And then per deal, you have also multiple players, right? So you've got
That's
different
right.
people and you don't really know who's actually going to have all the juice. So everything that you just said, you have to do with multiple personas as well. Right.
You do. And not only that, but I think you've got to, we talk about this in the Challenger customer when you find your mobilizer, right? So you got all these different stakeholder types, high performers target mobilizers. That's the person they hand the baton to and they hitch their wagon to. But this adds an extra dimension to that because that person may want to mobilize for your solution, but they're going to sit around a buying committee with maybe a dozen or more other stakeholders who all suffer from like this person over here says we need to do more research. They're suffering from information overload. This person over here thinks it's too risky and we can't sign up for the ROI. That person over there is hemming and hawing about the configurations and the integrations and the contract. And so you got to equip that mobilizer to jolt all of those other stakeholders into action, right? So it's a complex, especially we're talking about complex technology solution sales. You're trying to overcome indecision, not just of your main person, your mobilizer, but equip them to overcome the indecision of the other stakeholders on the buying committee. Because sometimes you won't have a chance to, right? You won't engage with those folks, but they are waiting in the depths to submarine your deal behind closed doors. So.
Totally. Amazing. So awesome there. I'll just kind of move on and kind of maybe rifle through some other questions, but I'm sure in your career, you've had probably lots of great mentors. Any one or two in particular you want to call out and advice you'd received?
Yeah. A lot in my career. I think back on some of the folks who kind of taught me as a researcher. There's a guy who used to be chief of research at CEB named Derek Van Beaver. He works at Harvard Business School now. Was a former research colleague of Clay Christensen before he passed away. And so he was kind of the godfather of research at our company, and a lot of what I learned from him and from watching how he operates. A number of other folks I'd call out. One of which just in the news recently, our former CEO Tom Monahan, who just became CEO at Heidrick and Struggles, the global search and talent advisory firm. So very excited about him. A number of former CBers there, but Tom was also a fantastic researcher and great storyteller. And so I had the CEB was a really fascinating, eclectic combination of really unique people, and but what drove all those people was one thing, which was going out there, questioning the conventional wisdom, using research and science to study these big problems that our clients, in my case, heads of sales, heads of customer experience, but we worked with CFOs, with heads of HR, chief information officers, you name it, that the big problems that they're struggling with, and to come at it from a different angle and then surface insights, whether it's Challenge or it's Jolt or any of these other pieces of content we put out there that give them a new path forward. But again, they're research and science backed, so they instill that confidence that we've been thinking about this problem the wrong way. But part of doing that is the research and science. Part of doing it is telling a great story around it so people want to take action on it. And so those guys were some of the very best in the business that I had a chance to work with. But it was a real privilege to be surrounded by folks like that for almost 20 years.
Awesome. And then similarly, maybe I'm sure there's a lot of them, but kind of one or two sales leaders that you would that you respect, and why?
A couple. So I'll call it. There's a lot of sales leaders I've had the privilege of working with. I think one of the ones who I don't know if she's forgiven us yet, but Deb Oler from Granger, who's since retired, we tell Deb's story in the Challenger sale, and I think I ran into her a number of years after the book came out, and she's like, my phone has been ringing off the hook ever since you guys wrote that book. If people want to know how do we do this, because it was progressive sales leaders like Deb who figured out Challenger selling before we even had a word for it, right? So they'd already figured out it's better to lead to your solution than lead with your solution, and you want to tell a different kind of story. So a lot of what we wrote about in the Challenger sale was built back from what really progressive leaders like Deb had figured out before we did. So you got to give credit where credit's due. These are very innovative sales leaders. Now today, I mentioned the professional services side of our business. We're working with some fantastic leaders out in the professional services world, and that is a different beast. It's very different from selling a product as a B2B salesperson. So we're working with a couple of folks. Angela Petros leads marketing and business development for Baker McKenzie, the fourth biggest law firm in the world. New enroll there and working in an organization. I think they have 5,000 lawyers globally across every market you can imagine, selling a very unique product in a very unique go-to-market motion. And remember, these folks in this world, they are both selling the work and then doing the work, right? It's you and I both know it's hard to get good at sales when it's your full-time job. Think about doing that across thousands and thousands of lawyers or partners in a global law firm where they don't get as many at-bats, right? How do you help them get better? Another one I'll mention is a woman named Erin Corbin-Mazzaro. So Erin is Chief Client Officer at Evershed Sutherland, another huge global law firm. And what I like about what Erin's doing is, typically in professional services, we spend time developing partners. So when you make partner and then we realize you need help learning how to be a business developer, that's where you get the training. Yeah. But what makes Erin really different is she's doing something that I think is really revolutionary in the space. She's actually investing at the associate level, right? So she's saying, look, I don't want people to make partner and then have this scary moment where it's like, holy smokes, I've never learned how to be a salesperson or how to be a business developer and have to kind of play catch up. I've been spending my whole career learning how to be a great lawyer or a great accountant or a great investment banker, and nobody ever taught me how to make it rain. She's investing at an early stage because she wants these people to feel really confident in their own business development capabilities so they hit the ground running when they make partner. And so I think that's pretty cool. A lot of other firms looking at what Eversheds is doing right now at the associate level and taking notes because it's a game changer in that space.
Awesome. All right. So I think maybe one more here. What about similarly any CEOs that you think kind of embody this as well?
Yeah, well, I got to give a shout out to my longtime boss, Haniel Lin, who he's now CEO of Castle Systems in the DC area. He's, I worked for Haniel for probably 16 of my, 18 or 19 years I was at CEB, phenomenal leader, super innovative thinker. Just learn. I can't even tell you how much I learned from the guy about managing people, about strategy, about presenting to senior executives, to winning buy-in for your ideas and your proposals. And then the other one, I just recently been spending some time with Scott McIntyre. Scott is CEO over at Guidehouse Consulting, huge global consulting outfit based in the DC area. And just have been fascinated. I spent a couple hours with them just recently learning about their story. They're a newish consulting firm who's absolutely on a tear. They're like a $3 billion plus consulting firm, now 17,000 employees. And the focus that Scott and his team have had on quality of delivery has really differentiated them in the marketplace, but also their focus on teamwork and collaboration, which really sets them apart in a world where, look, in a lot of professional services, it's about like, this is my client. And that's not how Guidehouse operates. So they operate from this is our client, and we work together from a team-based and collaborative perspective, which I think people talk about a lot, but these guys really make it happen in a very powerful way.
Awesome. All right. Well, time flies when you're having fun. You've been awesome. Matt, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So next week we have episode number 159, Muhammad Ali, who's COO at IBM Consulting. His title topic is going to be how generative AI is disrupting the IT consulting industry as we know it. So somewhat tied in with your professional services. So. Yeah. All right, everybody, have a great week. Awesome nuggets here for sure. Thank you so much, Matt. And Tucker, as always, thanks for your help behind the scenes. Thanks to Sandler for sponsoring. And those that are members of Sales Community, thanks. For those that are not, you got the free link there. Have a great day.